All right, sweetheart. Who's this man to you?
He's my dad.
Is he telling you to say that?
No. Officer.
Sir, I'm gonna need proof she's your daughter. Birth certificate, custody papers, something official. If you can't show me, you're going in cuffs.
When Officer Travis Henderson stepped into the sunlit retro diner that afternoon, his eyes locked onto a specific red vinyl booth, and his mind immediately jumped to a dangerous, career-destroying conclusion. He looked right past the stacks of half-eaten pancakes, the half-empty glasses of orange juice, and the relaxed posture of the two patrons. Instead, he fixated entirely on the sight of a black man in a dark green hoodie sitting across from a young, light-haired white girl in a teal cardigan. Driven by unchecked prejudice rather than actual police work, Henderson abandoned all protocol. He stormed over to the table, baselessly accused the calm father of endangering the child, and forced him into handcuffs while the terrified little girl watched her lunch turn into a nightmare. What the arrogant officer completely failed to realize was that the man he was unjustly parading through the diner was the Honorable Judge Marcus Sterling, one of the city's most prominent legal figures. Henderson's racially motivated decision to criminalize a wholesome father-daughter pancake date wouldn't just end his law enforcement career. It would publicly humiliate the entire department and force the city to hand over a historic $1.5 million civil rights settlement. Before we dive into the details of how this breathtaking instance of instant karma unfolded, let us know down in the comments, what city or country are you watching this from? We always love seeing where our viewers are located, and if you stand by the belief that a father's love and skin color should never be treated as suspicious, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served. Marcus Sterling had promised his daughter Lily this Saturday morning for weeks. Between courtroom sessions, case reviews, and the relentless demands of the bench, carving out uninterrupted time with his 8-year-old had become a precious rarity. So when he finally cleared his calendar, he knew exactly where to take her. Ruby's Diner, the same retro establishment where his own father had taken him decades earlier. The red vinyl booths still gleamed under the vintage pendant lights. The jukebox in the corner still played Motown classics, and the pancakes, golden, fluffy, drizzled with real maple syrup, were still the best in the city. Lily's eyes had lit up the moment they walked through the door, her teal cardigan bouncing as she skipped toward their usual booth by the window. Marcus slid into the seat across from her, his green hoodie comfortable and worn, the kind of casual clothing he only wore on days when he wasn't Judge Sterling, when he could just be Dad. Lily chattered excitedly about her week at school, about the science project on volcanoes she was building, about how her best friend Emma had lost another tooth. Marcus listened with the same attentiveness he brought to oral arguments, nodding and asking questions, making her feel heard in the way that only a parent who truly understood the value of presence could. The waitress brought their order, 2 stacks of pancakes, a side of crispy bacon, orange juice for Lily, coffee for Marcus. They ate slowly, savoring not just the food, but the moment itself. Marcus watched his daughter's animated expressions, the syrup on her chin, the way she gesticulated wildly when describing her teacher's reaction to her volcano prototype. This was what mattered. This was what all the late nights and difficult rulings were ultimately for. Moments like these, when the world narrowed to just the two of them in a red booth, sharing pancakes and laughter. Neither of them noticed the squad car pulling into the parking lot outside. Officer Travis Henderson had been on patrol for 7 years, long enough to develop what he considered a sixth sense for trouble. In reality, it was nothing more than a collection of unexamined biases and racial stereotypes that he'd never been forced to confront. His training sergeant had once praised him for his instincts, never bothering to examine what those instincts were actually based on. As he pushed open the diner door, his hand instinctively resting on his belt near his weapon, Henderson's gaze swept the room with the calculating assessment of someone looking for problems rather than serving and protecting. The elderly couple sharing pie at the counter, the young mother wiping ketchup off her toddler's face, and then the red booth by the window. Henderson's jaw tightened. A black man, mid-30s, wearing a hoodie, sitting across from a white child who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. The man was leaning forward, talking to the girl in what Henderson immediately interpreted as suspicious intimacy. The girl looked quiet, reserved. Henderson's mind began constructing a narrative before he'd taken 3 steps into the diner. He'd seen this before, he told himself. Trafficking, gruing. The news was full of stories. Children being taken, manipulated, moved across state lines. His breathing quickened slightly as he approached, his hand now definitely resting on the butt of his service weapon. The other diners faded into background noise. All he could see was what he'd convinced himself he was seeing, a crime in progress. What Henderson failed to notice was the framed photograph Lily had pulled from her backpack, showing her and Marcus at last year's father-daughter dance. He failed to notice the matching bracelets they both wore, handmade by Lily in art class. He failed to notice the easy, comfortable body language between them, the natural rhythm of family. He failed to notice all of this because he'd already decided what he was looking at, and confirmation bias is a hell of a drug. Marcus noticed the officer approaching before Lily did. Years on the bench had given him an acute awareness of body language, and everything about Henderson's approach screamed aggression. Marcus's internal alarm system activated, the one that every black parent develops early, the one that knows certain situations can escalate from routine to dangerous in seconds. "Excuse me, sir. I need to speak with you." Henderson's voice carried across the diner, loud enough that conversations at nearby tables stopped mid-sentence.
Marcus set down his fork carefully, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem? I need you to tell me your relationship to this child." Henderson's eyes flickered to Lily, who had frozen mid-bite, her fork suspended in the air. "This is my daughter, Lily." Marcus kept his voice calm, measured, the same tone he used to de-escalate tense moments in his courtroom. "We're having lunch together." "Your daughter." Henderson's skepticism dripped from every syllable. "I'm going to need to see some identification, and I need to speak with the child separately." Lily's eyes widened, darting between her father and the looming officer. Marcus could see the fear beginning to creep into her expression, and his protective instincts surged. But he knew from painful experience that any show of emotion, any hint of resistance, could be weaponized against him. "Of course." Marcus reached slowly for his wallet, narrating his movements. "I'm reaching for my wallet now in my back pocket. My identification is inside." He pulled out his driver's license and, after a moment's hesitation, his courthouse credentials, the ones that identified him as the Honorable Marcus Sturming, Circuit Court Judge. He held them out to Henderson. The officer barely glanced at them. "Anyone can get fake IDs made. I need you to step away from the child so I can verify her safety." "Officer, I assure you, this is my daughter. If you just look at my credentials." "I said step away from the child, now." Henderson's hand moved to his handcuffs. The diner had gone completely silent. Every patron, every waitress, every cook visible through the kitchen window had stopped what they were doing to watch the scene unfolding in the red booth by the window. The elderly couple at the counter looked on in shock. The young mother had pulled her toddler closer, instinctively protective. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was small, trembling, the single word cutting through Marcus like a blade. Henderson's face hardened at the word. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Stand up and step away from the child." Marcus felt the familiar weight settle onto his shoulders, the exhausting burden of having to remain twice as calm, twice as cooperative, twice as perfect as anyone else would be expected to be in this situation. He could feel his daughter's fear radiating across the table. He could see her hands beginning to shake. "Officer Henderson," Marcus read the name tag, committing it to memory. "I understand you're concerned about this child's welfare. That speaks well of your commitment to protecting our community. But I need you to understand that you are frightening my daughter. She is safe. She is with her father. And I'm asking you, respectfully, to review my identification and verify what I'm telling you through proper channels, rather than traumatizing an 8-year-old girl in the middle of a restaurant." The words were carefully chosen, delivered in the authoritative yet measured tone Marcus used when addressing attorneys who were out of line in his courtroom. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed, someone who expected reason to prevail. Officer Henderson heard only a black man in a hoodie refusing to comply with a police officer. "I said step away. Last warning." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Please don't hurt my dad. Please, we're just eating pancakes." Marcus stood slowly, his hands visible, palms out.
It's okay, sweetheart. Everything is going to be okay. I just need to talk with this officer for a moment, and then we'll finish our lunch. But even as he said it, even as he tried to project calm reassurance toward her terrified daughter, Marcus knew this situation was spiraling beyond his control. Henderson moved with the swift, practiced efficiency of someone who'd made this kind of arrest dozens of times before. He grabbed Marcus's wrist, yanking it behind his back with unnecessary force. "You have the right to remain silent." "Officer, you are making a mistake. I am a circuit court judge. My name is Marcus Sterling. If you would simply verify, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Daddy! Daddy, no!" Lily was out of her seat now, tears streaming down her face, her small hands reaching toward her father. "He didn't do anything. Let him go!" The diner erupted. The elderly man at the counter stood up, his voice shaking with outrage. "What the hell is wrong with you? That man was just having breakfast with his daughter." The young mother had her phone out, filming. "This is insane! They were eating pancakes. He showed you his ID." Henderson ignored them all, tunnel-visioned on what he believed was righteous enforcement. "You have the right to an attorney." Marcus twisted his head to look at Lily, his heart breaking at the terror in her eyes. "Lily, baby, look at me. Look at Daddy. Everything is going to be okay. I promise. I need you to be brave for me right now. Can you do that?" She nodded through her sobs, her whole body shaking. "Good girl. I need you to stay here. Mrs. Chen," he addressed the waitress who had rushed over, "will stay with you, and I need you to remember something very important. What's happening right now is wrong. It's unjust. But injustice doesn't win, baby. Truth wins. Always. Do you understand?" "I want to come with you," Lily's voice broke. "You can't, sweetheart, but I'll be back very soon. I promise." Henderson hauled Marcus toward the door, the handcuffs gleaming under the vintage lights. Every eye in the diner watched in stunned disbelief as a father was ripped away from his daughter over a plate of half-eaten pancakes. Lily's cries echoed through the restaurant, the sound of a childhood moment turned into a trauma she would carry for years. Marcus kept his eyes on his daughter until the diner door swung closed between them. The last thing he saw was her tear-stained face pressed against the glass.
The ride to the precinct was silent, except for the crackle of Henderson's radio. Marcus sat in the back seat, his mind already working through the legal implications, the documentation he would need, the accountability he would demand. But underneath the judge's analytical processing was a father's rage. Not the hot, explosive kind that leads to rash decisions, but the cold, determined fury that moves mountains and changes systems. At the station, Henderson walked Marcus through the booking area with something approaching swagger. He'd called ahead, priming his colleagues with his version of the story. "Caught this guy at Ruby's diner with a white kid who was clearly terrified," Henderson announced to the booking sergeant. "Wouldn't cooperate, got defensive when I tried to verify the child's safety. Classic grooming behavior." The sergeant looked up from his paperwork, his eyes widening slightly as he took in Marcus's calm, dignified bearing, despite the handcuffs. Something about the man's carriage, the way he held himself, triggered a flicker of doubt. "Did you run his ID?" the sergeant asked. "Showed me some fake credentials, said he was a judge." Henderson laughed. "Real original." "You didn't run them through the system?" "Didn't need to. I know what I saw." The sergeant opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the door to the shift captain's office flew open. Captain Richard Morrison had been in his office reviewing incident reports when his phone rang. Ruby Chen, the diner owner, was a personal friend. Her husband had served with Morrison's father in Vietnam. When she called, voice shaking with outrage, to tell him that one of his officers had just arrested Judge Marcus Sterling for having lunch with his own daughter, Morrison felt his blood pressure spike to dangerous levels. Now, as he stormed into the booking area and saw Judge Marcus Sterling standing in handcuffs like a common criminal, Morrison felt the floor drop out from under his career. "Jesus Christ!" The words came out as a whisper first, then louder. "Jesus Christ! Henderson, what the hell have you done?" Henderson turned, confused by his captain's tone. "Sir, I apprehended a suspect who was... That's Judge Marcus Sterling, you absolute idiot!" Morrison's voice thundered through the precinct. Every officer in earshot froze. "That's a circuit court judge having lunch with his own daughter." The color drained from Henderson's face. "What? No, he showed me fake Get those cuffs off him right now." Morrison himself moved forward, pulling out his keys with shaking hands, his face a mask of horrified apology. "Your Honor, I cannot begin to express—" "Save it, Captain." Marcus's voice was ice. He rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had left red marks. "Where is my daughter?" "Still at the diner, sir. Mrs. Chen is with her. I've already dispatched officers to bring her here, or we can take you back immediately." "Take me back, now." Morrison turned to Henderson, who stood frozen, his face ashen as the full weight of what he'd done crashed over him. "Badge, gun, hand them over." "Captain, Now, Henderson, you just arrested a sitting judge for being black in public. You terrorized a child. You ignored proper procedure, failed to verify identification, and created a civil rights nightmare that's going to cost this city millions. Badge and gun. You're suspended pending a full investigation, and if I have anything to say about it, you'll never wear a uniform in this state again." Henderson fumbled with his badge, his hands shaking. Around them, other officers watched in silence, several pulling out their phones to start documenting, already trying to distance themselves from the disaster. Marcus watched it all with the cold assessment of someone who'd seen justice fail too many times to take satisfaction in one bad cop finally facing consequences. This wasn't enough. This would never be enough, but it was a start. The ride back to the diner took 7 minutes that felt like hours. Marcus sat in the front seat of Captain Morrison's vehicle, his jaw clenched, his mind focused entirely on Lily. Morrison tried several times to apologize, to explain, to somehow make the situation less catastrophic. Marcus ignored him. When they pulled into the diner parking lot, Marcus was out of the car before it fully stopped. Through the window, he could see Lily still sitting in the red booth, Mrs. Chen beside her, her face blotchy and tear-stained. The moment she saw him, she bolted from the booth and through the door. "Daddy!" Marcus caught her as she launched herself into his arms, her small body wrapping around him with desperate tightness. She sobbed into his shoulder, her whole frame shaking with the release of fear and relief. He held her, one hand cradling her head, the other supporting her weight, and let her cry. "I've got you, baby. I've got you. You're safe. I'm here. I thought they were taking you away forever. I thought you'd never see me again." "Never, sweetheart. Nothing could ever take me away from you. Nothing." Captain Morrison stood at a respectful distance, witness to the reunion his officer had nearly destroyed. Mrs. Chen emerged from the diner with Lily's backpack and Marcus's wallet, her eyes fierce with protective anger. "You tell them," she said to Marcus, her accent thick with emotion. "You tell them what they did. You make them understand this cannot happen." Marcus nodded, still holding his daughter, still feeling her bite against his chest. "I will. I promise you, I will." Over the following weeks, Marcus did exactly that. He filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. He gave a press conference, Lily by his side, explaining in measured, devastating detail exactly what Officer Henderson's prejudice had cost. He met with civil rights organizations, with the mayor, with the police commission, and when the city offered to settle, Marcus negotiated not just for compensation, but for mandatory training, for policy changes, for accountability measures that would outlast his anger. The settlement was announced on a Tuesday morning, $1.5 million, one of the largest civil rights payouts in the city's history. The headlines were everywhere. Officer Henderson, after a thorough investigation, was terminated and faced criminal charges for civil rights violations. Captain Morrison implemented sweeping reforms in the department's approach to bias training. But Marcus Sterling wasn't done. He donated the entire settlement, every penny, to organizations fighting racial injustice, to groups providing legal support for families torn apart by police misconduct, to programs training officers to recognize and overcome their own biases. The money would do more good there, he told reporters, than sitting in his bank account. And then, on a Saturday morning, 6 months after that terrible afternoon, Marcus took Lily back to Ruby's diner. She hesitated at the door, her hand tight in his. The last time they'd been here, her world had fallen apart. The red booths suddenly looked threatening instead of welcoming. "I don't know if I can, Daddy." Marcus knelt down, meeting her eyes. "I know you're scared, baby. What happened here was wrong and scary and unfair, but we don't let fear win. We don't let bad people steal our good memories. We take back what belongs to us. And this place, our Pancake Saturdays, those belong to us, not to Officer Henderson, not to anyone else, just us." Lily searched his face, looking for the courage she needed. Finally, she nodded. They walked in together, hand in hand. Mrs. Chen rushed over immediately, tears in her eyes, and led them to the same red booth by the window. The same booth where injustice had tried to write their story. This time, they would write their own ending. As they sat down, as the familiar menu appeared in front of them, as the jukebox played Motown in the background, Lily reached across the table and took her father's hand. "Pancakes?" Marcus asked. "Pancakes," Lily confirmed, a small smile finally breaking through. And they ordered their breakfast, reclaiming their Saturday tradition, proving that love and justice could coexist, that trauma could be processed and survived, that a father and daughter eating pancakes was exactly what it appeared to be, a moment of simple, beautiful, ordinary family joy that no prejudice could permanently destroy. The orange juice was cold, the pancakes were perfect, and for the first time in months, when Lily looked at the red vinyl booth, she saw only what it was meant to be, a place where she and her father shared Saturday mornings and made memories that would last a lifetime. Outside, the world continued its complicated work of justice and reform. But inside Ruby's diner, in a red booth by the window, a father and daughter reclaimed their story, one bite of pancake at a time.